Well, morning everybody, or anybody, whatever. Look, today is the 9th of June 2020. Now, I just had a couple of discussions with different people fairly recently about my interests and my fascination, if you like, and so on in with things like UFOs, aliens, all that type of thing. And I thought that since this such a long time now since I actually had a broad daylight sighting of a large silver disc in Hallam in Victoria. I was only aged 15 or so at the time. It was 1967, 5th of March. Funny thing, the date sticks in your mind. Well, I'll give you the story of what occurred, and I'll add to that, in other words, with other things to expand on the subject a little bit. I was going down to the local railway station in Hallam. It was a rural area at the time, and it's only just across the paddocks and so on. And I had my little cheap camera with me, and so on. And we're just going to take some photos of trains. I think it's about one train to come through or something. Anyway, I was coming back, and suddenly there was a object in the air, just like it was like a distant plane or something coming, and I said, "What's that?" And well, we looked up, and wow, this suddenly this silvery greyish, sort of a silvery type of a disc was in view, and came round and circled around a number of times. I ended up taking about 6 photos of it, and it was pretty startling at the time, of course. And the thing is, I was actually already interested in the subject, and I used to attend these meetings that they had a UFO, like an investigation group in Melbourne. It was a long time ago. And anyway, I reported it there, and it ended up at in the local newspaper, and eventually got published in a book, and so forth. But the mysterious thing about it is that a gentleman called it was Professor McDonald from the United States came out and interviewed us one on one. I think it was the old-fashioned tape recorder. You had this great huge tape recorder with a big reel-to-reel. And anyway, had quite a discussion, quite an interview, let's say, about this. And it turns out that there was a farmer about 12 miles away. He was on his tractor, and all of a sudden this object, craft or whatever, flew over his head, just over at a fairly low altitude. Anyway, all of this was carried out, this interview, and Professor McDonald took my negatives away with him. Fortunately, I'd already taken some photos, and as I said, that they existed, and they're online now, and I'm going to put one of those on this. Somehow, NASA in the United States lost, like that, as I say on TV, they lost the negatives. But they did estimate that the object was between like 35 to 40 feet in diameter, they thought. And of course, many questions come from that. Was it manned? I don't know. Was it automated in some way, automatically coming out from being sent, in other words, from somewhere? I don't know. Those kind of questions are, you'd have to classify them as impossible to know. But what was the object? We don't know. But it's basically, the situation is this. Some UFO sightings are mistaken identity. And by that I mean there's some kind of aircraft or natural phenomena or whatever, and others are much closer in broad daylight, like mine was. And then you get a situation where you know that this is not, in those days, we're talking 1960s, there's no secret aircraft in or anything like that, military weapons or whatever in development at the time, and they wouldn't be around semi-urban and rural areas anyway where they could be seen. So the answer is they weren't. It's not involved in that. Was it extraterrestrial? Well, I would suggest probably, in a sense, that I did a lot of research afterwards. I read a whole series of books on the subject, and I got interested in that. And then basically my research, and I did a video on this subject, basically offers up proof of aliens and so on. And of course people scoff immediately. Oh, aliens, what are you talking about? Or, how can you prove that? Well, the definition of the word proof is something where it has overwhelming evidence for it. Now, that's all you need, in other words. And incidentally, I am a Christian, but as I say, the funny thing is there's a pastor, Joseph Prince, his name, a lot of people following, literally millions of followers. But anyway, he made the statement that if a person is presented with something that has overwhelming evidence for it, and they still will not accept that evidence, then they are unteachable. Now, you might have been talking about Christian subjects there, but he may not. It's just any subject. So, and I covered all that in my video on the subject, but the thing is, he was right. I don't want to go right over the whole thing, because I have covered the subject, but I believe there's enough evidence there to be seen as acceptable. In other words, it's true. But the most recent information I've been getting is that they're going to have what is known as full disclosure on the subject of UFOs, aliens, and all that type of thing, that have, where for 60 or 70 years now they've been lying. The governments have been covering up and lying on the subject, and there are countless numbers of cases that are totally authentic, highly qualified witnesses, and including things that have been online on the what they call the Tic Tac UFOs, which are American pilots of aircraft carrier and so on. Back in 2004, saw these craft, and one of them dropped from 20,000 feet to 50 feet in the space of 1 second, and was measured on the ship's radar, seen on the radar. They flew over the object, and they flew, in fact, one of the objects was under the water, just under the water out there, about 80 miles west of San Diego, actually. And they estimated that the craft was about the size of a 737 aircraft. And these guys, as I say, they're well trained in observation and recognizing things, whether it's aircraft or and so on, or what the object is. Now, there are many cases like this, and as I say, this full disclosure I do really believe is going to occur, but I don't have any inside information on it other than to say I've seen a number of programs on the subject that seem to indicate that something is going to happen within a few months or a year or two. We're not sure exactly when, but even the crashed craft that they've well, all the way back to the Roswell crash in 1947, and there have been others, will eventually be just bought out and put on public display, in other words. And people will be able to see for themselves, touch the object, let's say, and see that it's all completely above board and genuine. And I have mentioned the various cases, but anyone interested could look up Westall High School UFO. 1966 was in Melbourne. That was one of the most extraordinary cases where two discs were landed but about a foot above the ground, right at the rear of the school, right in broad daylight, I think 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the afternoon, seen by the entire school, teachers, students, hundreds of students, I mean 200 plus. Oh, they had a pandemonium. They were told, don't touch it and don't climb over the fence. And of course one of the kids did climb over the fence, put his hand out. It was too hot. He put his hand about 1 foot away from the discs, and they eventually flew up and at high speed and at an angle, just zoomed off into the clouds and so on. Now you can research all this and you can see that it's all completely genuine, but I thought I'd give my own personal experience on that one, and that is why I got interested in that subject. Now various people have asked about that, but I thought I'd restate everything and then send it to one or two people who would be interested. So thanks for viewing.